Hello and welcome to part 9 of Knitting Machines for Beginners. I am going to show you today how to knit hems, which will be very useful when it comes to making jumpers and so on. A couple of things just to say before we start. You'll notice I'm using a much bigger machine with a big carriage. This one's a Brother KH881. Okay, and you'll also notice that I've got a tension master that's got two different colours of yarn, this grey here and this pink. The machine isn't important, I'm not going to be using any of the extra bits on it, but the two different colours is important. This particular mast happens to have two different springs on it. If you only have one on your tension master, you can use one colour and then thread up with another colour, but I'm using this machine to save time. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to knit a plain hem, which is a useful way of starting things like scarves and so on. And the first thing I need to do is I need to cast on with my waste yarn, the grey stuff. This is just a length of random yarn that I've chosen only because it happens to be a different colour from what I'm pretending I'm going to be my main yarn, which is my pink. Okay, now I'm going to use the Brother method of casting on, which means I've pulled forward every other needle. And you're going to see here that actually I have ended it slightly beyond the needle number 10. I want to cast on 20 stitches, but actually that's a 21st stitch. That's because I want my last stitch to be knitted on my first row, and then I'll decrease that in a minute. So my first job is to thread up, not with pink yarn, we'll thread up with the waste yarn, like so. And I'm going to knit just one row across. And again, I've done this on every other needle, so this is going to be a cast-on comb cast-on. This particular cast-on comb, the needles point the other way to what they did with the last cast-on comb, so I'm actually going to hook it in from the bottom upwards. Let me just do that, and you can see the advantage of having them this way round is that I can hook it on upwards like so. Ooh, not that well, obviously. And then I can carefully remove the yarn from the cast-on comb, leave it like that, and then I can hang my weights, and I'm away. The thing I need to do, of course, next is to bring all of the rest of the needles I want forwards, and I'm going to knit myself 5 or 6 rows in waste yarn. Okay, so here's my first row. Now that's always going to be a challenge because this cast-on comb hangs down like so. And now you'll notice I've got myself too many stitches still. So what I will do now is I will decrease the number of stitches I have by moving this stitch across to there. I only want 5 or 6 rows, it doesn't matter, just enough to stop it unravelling entirely. So let's get a few rows more. There we go, that will do. Okay, so I've just got a little bit of waste yarn, and now having knitted some rows in waste yarn, I'm going to break the end like that, and I'm going to just clip it into my yarn clip. And that's me done with the waste yarn for the moment. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to be able to remove the waste yarn easily, and I'm going to do that by actually knitting in my ravel cord. Now this requires a little bit of sort of extra thought in that I can't thread it through the yarn tensioner, so it's going to have to be hand tensioned. So if I just swing this round like so, you can see what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the ravel cord into my yarn tensioner, okay, and I'm just going to hold it up with my hand whilst I knit it through. This does have, you sort of need 3 hands for this, okay, but I'll tell you what I can do. I can clip the ravel cord into the bottom there, and then that will give me just a tiny bit of tension, so I can then hold it up. Oh, great, that didn't work. Just wind it around there. Okay, I can hold it up and then knit it through as follows. There we go. And if I swing this back, you will be able to see that I have knitted a row of ravel cord. That will become important in a minute. Now the next thing I need to do is I need to knit the number of rows that I would like of main yarn for my hem. So let's say I want to do a 10 row hem. So I'm going to start, I've put the row counter on, and I'm going to start just by knitting through, there we go, some of my main yarn. There's one row, and I'm going to knit all the way up to 10. Just clip that off there. Okay, and knit all the way up to 10 rows. Now, you can see by the way my row counter, I set it to start counting at the beginning of this. Now I've got 10 rows for my hem. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to knit one row at a really big tension. I'm going to knit it at tension 10. Okay, and you'll be able to see in a minute that that row is much, much looser. Then I'm going back to my original tension, which in this case is tension 4 out of 10, and I'm going to knit another 10 rows. So I've got twice as many rows as I need. Now, having done that, you should be able to see that I've got 20 rows of the tension I want, and then one much looser row. We're going to fold it up on itself, and that is going to form a hem. Now, if I hold this up, let me just point this down a bit further. If I hold this up, you can see that I've got a whole bunch of stitches in pink that are only held on by the ravel cord. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get myself a needle transfer tool. I'll just take the weights off for the minute. I'm going to get myself a transfer tool, and I'm going to start transferring these stitches up onto the needles that they came from. The first stitch is always the dodgiest because it's turned back in on itself. So the first stitch is in fact this one. Okay, and what I'm doing, if you can see, I'm putting my transfer tool through that stitch. Okay, I'm going to pull it up, I'm going to stick it on that needle there. I'm going to do this one at the end as well. And again, can you see there's a dodgy one that is turned in on itself? So I'm going to transfer that up as well. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to transfer every single stitch on the hem up onto its equivalent needle. Okay, so that's, where is it? There you go, that's my first stitch. Up it goes. And I'm going to transfer all of the stitches in the middle up onto the bed. So here's my second stitch. And again, when you can bend your head right over this and get on with it, it's a lot easier. Doing it with the camera in front of your face is significantly more difficult. But you can see that I can pull up and hook on all of the stitches. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pause the video so that I can do all of this, because you don't need me to see me do it 20 times. And then I'll come back and we'll see what we have got. Right, I've hung up all my stitches. The end stitches are always going to be the dodgiest ones. Now I'm going to rehang my weights like so. And then, having clipped this yarn back in again, I can carry on knitting for a few rows. Before I do that, I'm just going to push all the needles back, being careful that I haven't got anything behind the latches. There we go. If you're worried about what the end stitches are, just knit any old thing onto the end. Knit more stitches in rather than, or hang up more stitches rather than fewer, because you know, you don't want to miss a stitch. If you do, it's no problem, you can pick it up later. Now the first row is going to be the dodgiest, but I'm going to knit this across like so, and now I can just carry on. I'm just going to reweight that. I can just carry on. Now after I've done this for a while, once I need to do anything else, I can get rid of the waste yarn. And getting rid of the waste yarn is dead simple. Okay, you just grab the ravel cord. I tend to leave a bar in for the moment, and you pull it, and it will pull the knitting tight, and it will be difficult to pull out. But if you have made it slippery enough, the ravel cord will pull out. Your waste knitting will fall off, and what you are left with is a hem which has been knitted in and will not come apart with no loose stitches. And there you go, that can be a quite nice cuff if you did it up like that, in this case for a extremely tiny dolly. So that is the plain hem, and that is a really good way of doing things. Let me just take this knitting off and I can show you both sides. So here comes the knitting. Okay, so you've got a hem on both sides. Okay, nice plain hem, no loose ends, and you didn't need to cast on at all. Brilliant. Now, what if you're doing a jumper and you need to have some ribbing? Now, there are ways of doing ribbing on the machine, but they involve lots and lots of careful undoing of stitches and then relatching them up. And if you've got 150 stitches that you need to rib, that's going to take you a long time. So I'm going to show you a quick and dirty method of getting a thing that looks a bit like a rib and works perfectly well for jumpers. Let me just set up again, I'll come back to you. Right then, to knit this particular type of hem called a mock rib, we start again exactly as before. So we're going to start with some waste yarn, knitting one row. You can see, this is very important, that I've still only put every other needle forwards, like so. But this time, when I hang my cast-on comb, I am not going to bring the other needles forwards at all. I'm just going to carry on doing waste yarn with only half of the needles going. Okay, so I'll knit a few rows with only half of the needles in working position. You'll notice again, I've gone one bigger than I originally did, and I'm not going to change that for the while. So you can see I've got the 21st stitch on there just to keep it and keep a forward needle on each end. So this time, there we are. Okay, you can see that I've knitted this very, very loose knitting that's only on half of the needles. Once again, I'm going to break the waste yarn and get rid of it. And then also, once again, I'm going to put in the ravel cord. So, still only on half the needles. So let's put in my ravel cord so I can take the knitting out again. And again, with the kneading three hands, with them's the breaks. Okay, there we are, one ravel cord. Now, what I'm going to do now when I switch to my main yarn is I'm going to turn the tension to a much smaller number. So actually, I'm going to turn this all the way down to 1, maybe 2, I think. Okay, so it's going to be much tighter knitting, and that is for a reason which I'll come to in a minute. But basically, we're going to create the impression of it being ribbing without actually any ribbing having taken place whatsoever. Now, ribbing, as you might know, is one plain, one purl stitch in a row, as going up in columns. However, knitting machines don't do purl stitches except in a highly specific set of circumstances. So what we're going to do is we're going to do one plain, one nothing stitch, but they're going to be very tight stitches, so that the nothing stitch will still sort of take up some of the slack. So let's have a go at this and see. There it is across one. And as before, I'm going to do 10 rows and then a loose row and then 10 rows. So hold on, let me just count that one row. Now, you've got to be very careful with this. It can sometimes fall out the yarn clip. Right. Okay, there we go. Not the finest piece of tensioning ever in the whole world, but it will do. Now then what we're going to do, by the way, this is all really loose and floppy, and it's always going to stay really loose and floppy, okay, is we are going to up the tension to about 6, do one row, and then go back down to 2 or 1. I'm going to do 10 rows again. Right, there we go. And now when I hang up these loops from the knitting, I'm not going to hang them onto the needles that I already used. I'm going to hang them onto the needles which are currently in non-working position. So what I will do is get my needle transfer tool, and again, starting at the loop at the edge, which is always the dodgy one. All the other stitches are nice and clear. This particular stitch is hidden at the edge. You do have to be careful to pick it up, otherwise it will unravel from the edge. And this one is going onto my first unused needle. I'll bring it right out. Okay, ditto at this edge. Now, quite often you end up with more loops than you have needles, and that's perfectly fine. That happens. I would just end up putting some of the stitches in the same needle. But now I'm going to go up and I'm going to carefully pick up all of the loops and put them onto the currently empty needles. Okay, actually I want to just take that ravel yarn off, otherwise it will make it really difficult to pull out. Not impossible. If you do get the ravel yarn caught, it's not the end of the world, but it's better if it isn't. Okay, and then we just go along the row and pick up all of the first loops. And obviously, this being a video demonstration, it is not playing ball, and I'm going to end up hanging all sorts of ravel yarn all over the place. And that's just the way that it is. Okay, let's take that off again. Don't want that there. Okay, with a bit of luck, when you do it, it'll end up being a bit easier. When you start getting along the line, the stitches get a bit clearer. Like that. And like that. And can you see I'm not making any particular effort to pull them back in this case, because the needles haven't got stitches on them already. So I can pull them all back at the end and it will not be a problem. There we go. Last couple. And as we thought might happen, I have ended up with 2 stitches spare, so I shall just put them on there. Okay, don't leave any stitches not hanging on needles, otherwise they will unravel. And then I'll push that all back. Okay, and then, even though it looks like an absolute complete and total mess, I can now knit a few rows. Now, don't forget at this point, I'm now doing normal knitting, so I need to up my tension to normal, which is, I think I'll do 5 in this case, for example. And then I'm just going to knit a few rows off. Okay, and I'm going to put some weights back on it. You don't necessarily need weights, but it helps. Just make sure they all knit off the needles nicely. Now, when I pull out the ravel cord this time, with a bit of luck, you will see, you don't have to pull the ravel cord out until the end of the whole sleeve or back or whatever it is you want. But when I pull the ravel cord out, you should see we've got ourselves something that looks quite a lot like ribbing. And actually it's stretchy like ribbing. And again, you can sew it together like ribbing. You have to sew it together both sides. But there you go. So that is how you do hems, either plain hems or mock ribbed hems. You can close up these little holes if you want by transferring stitches, but actually I quite like these little holes. And that is now you with all the basic information you need to make something like a jumper. I will make one more video before we actually do a making thing, which is joining pieces of knitting together, and I shall see you for that next time. Goodbye.